In the small town of Eldridge Hollow, tucked away between sweeping hills and a sky often filled with clouds, stood the forsaken house. This house was unlike any other, with its peeling paint that flaked off like forgotten memories and crooked windows that seemed to watch over the town like a pair of glassy eyes. The house whispered secrets, tantalizing those brave enough to listen. Children often dared each other to step closer, but none would linger long enough to discover what truly resided within. It was an eerie structure, an unsettling presence that sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest souls. The air around it was thick with silence, punctuated only by the rustle of leaves and the desperate whispers of winds, as if they were carrying the sorrowful echoes of those who had once lived within its walls. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, a group of children, fueled by the thrill of adventure, approached the forsaken house. They were led by Tommy, a cheerful boy whose bright laughter often masked the unease that settled in their small town's bones. Even when the shadows grew long and the wind howled a spine-chilling tune, Tommy laughed louder, as if trying to chase away the darkness. "Come on, it's just an old house," he cried out, his words igniting a flicker of bravery in his friends' hearts. Brandon, Leah, Sarah, and Jake were hesitant but excited. They could feel something special was about to happen. The air around them tingled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. As they crossed the threshold, their footsteps echoed within the empty halls like a sinister melody that sang of forgotten moments. The interior welcomed them with a specter-like embrace, revealing dusty furniture draped in white sheets, dark shadows lurking just behind the corners, and the heavy scent of decay that clung to the air like a shroud. "Look at this place," Brandon exclaimed, his voice filled with awe, trying to mask his growing anxiety. "It's like something from a movie." The children giggled nervously, sharing looks that mixed excitement with fear. They made jokes, trying to push down their swirling emotions, but despite their laughter, a palpable dread slithered among them, wrapping around them like a suffocating mist. Just as Tommy began to feel a twinge of reluctance, a creaking sound echoed ominously behind them, as if the door had a mind of its own. The sound sent chills rushing through everyone, causing their hearts to beat louder. "Did you hear that?" Leah whispered, her eyes wide with the thrill and terror of the moment. Tommy tried to sound brave. "It's probably just the old house settling. Come on," he urged, his voice slightly faltering. But the echo of their footsteps felt heavier now, heavier with the weight of secrets buried deep within the walls of the forsaken house. They hesitated but pressed further inside, driven by a combination of curiosity and adventure. As they moved deeper into the heart of the house, they stumbled upon a dimly lit room that seemed untouched by time. The furniture appeared misshapen, as if it had been twisted and warped in a dark room of nightmares. Jagged edges sliced through the dim light, and the wallpaper peeled away like the memories of those long forgotten. Faded portraits hung crookedly on the walls. The faces of those confined within them seemed to follow the children with their hollow, accusing eyes, as if aware of the trespassers disturbing their eternal slumber. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from an adjacent room, shaking the children down to their core. Terrified, they huddled close together, hearts racing uncontrollably. The air was electric, charged with an unseen presence that swirled around them like a storm, a force that made them want to scream and run all at once. "It's just the wind," Tommy declared bravely, though his voice wavered. "Let's just check it out." His words rang hollow and were swallowed by the darkness looming around them. They steeled themselves, following Tommy as they pushed into the next room. What they found there sent shock waves of fear through their bodies. The furniture lay strewn across the floor in chaos, as though a fearsome entity had created havoc. A rocking chair in the corner swayed gently back and forth, although there was no breeze to stir it. It was as if someone had just hurriedly left their seat. "Maybe we should go," Jake suggested, his voice trembling with fear. But Tommy, his heart swelling with bravado, pointed toward the stairs leading up into an open darkness that seemed to swallow what little light remained. "This is just a house," he insisted, even though he could feel the weight of fear pressing down around him. With hesitant determination, they ascended the creaking steps, each noise from the old wood warning them of the hidden horrors that lay above. As they reached the top of the stairs, the air changed. A foreboding dread wrapped around them like a cold blanket. The hallway stretched out before them, endless and dark. Each door stood slightly ajar, revealing unsettling glimpses into rooms where shadows danced and whispers seemed to be confined within the walls. Then, a long, eerie giggle slithered through the air, chilling their blood. The sound wrapped around them, making their limbs heavy with fear. "What was that?" Sarah squeaked, clutching Jake's arm tightly. The laughter echoed again, more distinct this time, and it was followed by soft whispers, almost like a lullaby lost to despair. "We should go back," Leah whined softly, her own bravery beginning to fade away. But part of Tommy, that adventurous spark ignited by his curiosity, pushed them forward. "Let's see where it's coming from," he whispered, excitement battling with fear. As they approached the last door at the end of the hallway, a part of them screamed to run, to escape the twisted dreams surrounding them. Yet, another part, that relentless pull of childlike curiosity, pushed them closer still. What could be hiding behind that door? Would there be another twist in their adventure? When Tommy swung the door wide open, the room was a pitch-black abyss that seemed to swallow any remaining light. A cold breath flowed from inside, brushing against their cheeks like a warning from some unseen entity, sending chills through their spines. "Let's turn on the flashlight," Tommy suggested, his heart racing fast. He fumbled for the flashlight in his pocket, finally getting it to flicker and glow, its beam cutting through the suffocating darkness like a sword through fog. What they saw before them was beyond any nightmare they could have conjured. A half-circle of children, their bodies twisted and malformed in grotesque ways, were gathered in the room. Their faces were pale, eyes dark and empty. They rocked back and forth, locked in an unsettling rhythm, chanting incoherent words in hushed, guttural tones. The sight pierced through the fragile safety of the children's hearts. It blended the macabre and the innocent, twisting Tommy and his friends' understanding of what it meant to be young and playful. The children in the room looked up at them, their hollow gazes filled with a hunger that made Tommy's heart sink. These were no ordinary spirits. They were lost souls, trapped in some loop of playfulness gone wrong. As if drawn by their bright life, the spirits' gazes turned toward Tommy and his friends. The air grew heavy with an unsettling energy, making it hard to breathe. Panic ignited within them, inspiring a primal urge to flee. Without thinking, they turned to run, fear propelling them back down the dark hallway. But the house was alive. Shadows flickered along the walls, weaving in and out of their view as if they were part of a wicked game. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the halls, coaxing them back as they stumbled blindly toward the staircase. It felt as if the walls were closing in, forcing the children to confront the horror that lay behind them. Tommy and his friends felt a grip on their hearts, a relentless tug urging them to look back, to understand what haunted the forsaken house. They were not simply running away from something, they were being pursued by the weight of stories echoing through time. The forsaken house was alive with dread, eager to share its ancient tales with those who dared enter. What had once been an innocent exploration now thrummed with a sinister pulse, promising that the haunting was only just beginning. With each step they took, the house seemed to thrum like a beating heart, alive and eager, opening its doors wide for the children who dared to seek adventure. But at what cost? Chapter 2. The Confrontation. As they stumbled away from the ghastly gathering of childlike spirits, the echoes of their chilling laughter twisted into sinister shrieks. Their high-pitched giggles bounced off the walls, twisting and turning in a way that felt alive, as if the house itself was part of this ghastly symphony. Tommy, Sarah, Jake, and Lucy ran down the shadowed halls, their hearts pounding wildly in their chests. The sound of their feet pounding against the creaky floor seemed to drown out everything else for a moment. But as they ran, the laughter followed them, a mocking echo that wrapped around their fear like a tight noose. "Keep going, don't stop," Tommy shouted, trying to lead his friends through the maze of twisty corridors. Panic clawed at his insides, like a wild animal desperate to escape. "This way," he cried, hoping that any direction might lead them to safety. But with every turn and corner, it felt like the house was changing, shifting and mutating into something darker and more frightening. Each doorway seemed to stretch further away, each hallway seemed to grow longer, trapping them deeper in its malevolent embrace. As they hurried through the house, their surroundings transformed. The walls closed in on them, and the long, dark corridors seemed to twist and turn, each bend leading them deeper into the shadows. The portraits hung on the walls, their painted eyes eerie and unnerving, seemed to follow their every move with judgment, discouragement, and fear. It was as if the once innocent pictures of smiling families had morphed into a gallery of frowns and scowls, condemned by the very house that surrounded them. When they finally stumbled into what appeared to be the living room, the scent that hit them was suffocating, like rotting food and damp wood mixed with something metallic. It was more potent than before, causing them to recoil in disgust. The once cozy room had turned into a scene from a nightmare, where the furniture seemed to twist under the weight of the darkness, casting long, sinister shadows that danced against the walls. The chairs looked hunched over, as if hiding secrets, and the tables seemed to lean in, listening carefully for their whispered fears. "What do we do?" Sarah exclaimed, her voice barely above a whisper, cracking under the weight of panic that threatened to swallow them whole. The group huddled together, uncertainty gnawing at their hearts as they stared into the gloom. The laughter returned, now an overwhelming cacophony, and it burrowed deep into their minds, making it hard to think. The darkness tightened around them, suffocating and terrifying, as they realized the spirits were closing in, their shrill shrieks echoing through the room. "Keep it together, guys," Tommy urged, trying to sound braver than he felt. He could feel his resolve starting to waver, the cold grip of fear wrapping around him like a shroud. Just as they prepared to make a run for it, a flicker of movement grabbed Jake's attention. He pointed with wide eyes, and the rest turned to see the horror reveal itself. The malevolent spirits began to seep out from the very walls, oozing like shadowy tar from the darkest corners of their nightmares. They twisted and contorted grotesquely, their features becoming clearer in the dim light. Some bore wide, gaping mouths but no eyes, while others had hollow faces that shimmered with a malicious grin. The air turned frigid, and it felt as if the life was being sucked out of the room, leaving only their dread behind. Each spirit bore a look of ravenous delight, as if they could feed on the children's fear, and the very thought sent a shiver down their spines. "Time to go," Lucy shouted, her voice trembling. The courage to move was hard to muster, but desperation surged within them. "Let's go back to the stairs. There might be a way out." Tommy's heart raced anew. He felt the sickening sensation of dread spinning his stomach into knots, yet he couldn't let fear win. They turned around, determination in their hearts even as terror hung heavy in the air. But with every step, it felt as if the house fought against them. The spirits began to swirl around them, laughter rising to a terrifying crescendo, each peal striking at their confidence. Tommy felt the walls inch closer, trying to push them deeper into despair. He resisted the urge to panic, remembering the stories his grandpa used to tell him about bravery and friendship, and he called to his friends, "We have to make it. Stay together." They raced toward the entrance where they had first entered, believing that the stairs would lead them to safety. Yet something shifted in the house, a sinister force gnawing at their spirits. The very shadows seemed to come alive, not just chasing them, but wrapping around their ankles, trying to drag them down. Tommy led the charge, falling into a rhythm that matched his racing heart. The flickering flashlight's light cast eerie shapes on the walls, enveloping them in a haunting glow as they hurtled towards what they hoped was an escape route. But just as hope began to blossom in their hearts, a bone-chilling gust swept through the house, snuffing out the light completely, leaving them in an oppressive darkness. "What happened?" shouted Jake, fear creeping into his voice. They grasped at each other, trying to find comfort against the rising terror all around them. The laughter, once distanced by their flight, grew closer, now a chaotic blend of joy and menace that filled their ears like a terrifying symphony. "Wait, hold on," Tommy said, trying to gather his thoughts. He could hear his friends breathing heavily, their panic mimicking the wild beating of his own heart. "We have to keep moving." With that determined call, he held the darkness at bay long enough to inch forward. They reached out into the void, feeling their way through the chilling shadows that seeped into their bones. Finally, they stumbled towards what they thought to be an exit, the door that promised safety. But as it swung wide open, dread pooled in the pit of their stomachs. Outside was not the refreshing sky they had imagined. Instead, it was a swirling void of darkness, an endless expanse that looked as though it belonged to a twisted dream or a haunted realm. "Is this real?" Sarah whispered, unable to keep the fear out of her voice. It felt like they were teetering on the edge of a deep, endless abyss, and Tommy's heart sank. They had escaped the confines of the haunted house, yet now faced something far more terrifying, an emptiness that felt alive, a darkness that breathed despair. As they stood at the threshold, They could feel the spirits' laughter crescendo behind them, ushering them into the unknown. The forsaken house, twisted and alive with malicious energy, had ensnared them within its grasp, and its laughter mocked their every breath. It was no longer just an ordinary house. It had become a labyrinth of nightmares, an inescapable prison that thrived on fear. On 3, we jump. Tommy whispered fiercely, trying to find courage in their darkest hour. He counted slowly, gathering strength. 1, 2, 3, and together, they leapt into the swirling darkness, hoping against hope that there would be something, anything, waiting for them on the other side. As they dove into the unknown, dread gripped their hearts, and with it came a fleeting sense of hope. They were no longer alone. They had each other. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to drive out the darkness. With each step into the darkness, the air grew colder, curling around them like a serpent strangling its prey. The chill was not just a physical sensation. It seeped into their bones, winding through their heads and hearts. The children soon discovered they were no longer standing on solid ground. Instead, they floated, suspended in an enigma. The forsaken house and its sinister inhabitants had transformed their surroundings into an unfathomable nightmare. A dimension where darkness preached and shadows thrived, suffocating whatever glimmer of light remained in their minds. What is this? Where are we? Jake wondered aloud, his voice barely piercing the oppressive silence. Each word echoed back, bouncing off unseen walls as if they were a willing sacrifice, consumed by despair. It was as though the house had cast them into an ever-expanding void, one where reality twisted and blurred. Shapes formed and melted around them, shadowy figures suggesting terrifying creatures that danced menacingly close to the edges of their fears. The spirits, however, lurked just beyond their vision, their eagerness woven into every sinister resonance that vibrated through the air. Tommy grasped Jake's arm tightly and whispered, "We have to stick together. We can't let them take us." His voice trembled, barely concealing the desperation growing within him. Each sound they made seemed to anger the shadows that coated the ground like a heavy fog. Panic loomed over them like a dark cloud, ready to burst. The oppressive dread weighed heavily in the air, mingling with the howls of hollow laughter that seemed woven into the very fabric of this forsaken place. Something malevolent was stirring, watching, and waiting. Suddenly, the landscape around them shifted as if it were a painting being violently altered by an unseen hand. Before them appeared a grotesque mansion, its dark windows resembling eyes watching their every move. It looked oddly familiar, a haunting reflection of the forsaken house, now exuding an even more sinister aura. The children strained their eyes, trying to grasp who had once lived within such a wretched place. Their imaginations conjured images of past inhabitants, but the gruesome details overwhelmed them, peeling paint that flaked away like dead skin, shadowy halls where light seemed afraid to venture, and a malevolent presence that oozed from every crack and crevice. "Do you think this was the house we were just in?" Sarah asked, her voice quivering as she intertwined her fingers with Jake's, seeking comfort in his warmth. A faint shimmering light flickered at the edge of the mansion, catching Tommy's attention like a moth drawn to a flame. Hope flickered in his chest momentarily. Perhaps this light might be the answer to their prayers, guiding them back to safety. But beneath his desperate hope lay a growing dread. Was this truly a way out, or just another trap laid by the lurking spirits? As they crossed the threshold into the mansion, an ethereal beam of light illuminated the vast room, casting a mystical glow that felt almost warm against their skin. They found themselves surrounded by old portraits lining the walls, each grief-stricken face staring back at them with hollow eyes. But as Tommy gazed closer, an unsettling sense of recognition enveloped him. Each painting depicted a child eerily reminiscent of him and his friends, their wide eyes shrouded in darkness, smiles twisted into something grotesque and prismatic. Beneath each portrait was a name etched in a crimson hue, chilling him to the core. Each name whispered a tale of sorrow that lay heavy on his heart, tales that echoed with a meaning he could scarcely comprehend. The walls dripped with shadows as if they contained the very essence of despair, and the laughter grew louder, morphing into a chorus. It was an uncomfortable melody, mixing with the agonizing cries of long-lost children condemned to haunt this place for all eternity. Their whispers filled the air, rising from the paintings, as if the very spirits documented on the canvas were pleading for escape. As the children ventured deeper into the House of Horrors, they finally understood that they were not merely trapped, they had been marked for something infinitely more sinister. The malevolent spirits were younger, yet filled with a wicked power, their hunger for company driving them to lure unwitting souls into their grotesque games. Suddenly, the gleaming light flickered once more, and darkness engulfed everything. The sudden absence of light sent shivers of primal fear coursing through their veins. The group stumbled backward, panic racing through them. The sinister laughter returned, a cacophony of voices rising around them, crescendoing with each tantalizing moment like a dark symphony. Despair flooded the children's hearts, coiling around them, squeezing tighter and tighter until breathing became an impossibility, leaving them feeling trapped and helpless. "Run!" Tommy yelled, shaking off the crippling sensation of the shadows that sought to envelop him. Instinct kicked in, propelling him toward the door from which they had entered. It was a glimmer of hope, a way back to light and warmth. The others clung to him, their fear heightening as they fought against the dark tendrils that brushed against their skin. It felt as though the shadows clutched at their ankles, trying to pull them back into the depths of despair. They raced through the corridor, the darkness swirling around them, pulling at their clothes like desperate fingers. But as they moved, the walls began to shift, elongating with each step they took, as if the house itself were warping to trap them further. Staircases twisted into ceilings and doorways morphed into walls, wrapping them in confusion. The air grew denser, weighing upon their chests like a ghostly hand reaching out, clutching them with a greedy squeeze, refusing to let them go. The echoes of laughter thickened, swirling around them like a storm of despair, making them feel lost in a monstrous maze. What had begun as an adventure had morphed into the darkest of nightmares, each shadow harboring creatures waiting with open mouths, ready to consume their very essence. Just as Tommy thought he might burst through into freedom, a dreadful sight stopped him cold in his tracks. The children froze before a gaping hole that seemed to have appeared impossibly out of nowhere, beckoning to them with an insatiable hunger. A swirling mass of darkness writhed below, shadowy tendrils reaching up in a way that sent ice flashing through their veins. Every fiber of Tommy's being screamed to retreat, to turn back, but his legs felt like they were glued to the floor. "No, we can't go in there," Sarah pleaded, her eyes wide and terrified, her breath coming in short gasps. She seemed smaller here, dwarfed by the dark void. But as they turned to find an alternate path, the flickering light once again returned, illuminating grotesque figures emerging from the shadows, twisted forms with limping limbs and haunting eyes that glinted with malice. They moved closer, surrounded by shadows that flickered and danced like flames, eager to snuff out what little light remained. And in that solitary instant, each child realized the gruesome truth of the forsaken house. It was a prison, a graveyard for spirits trapped in purgatory, desperately seeking companionship for their suffering. The growl of a sinister wind roared around them, accentuating the laughter, the sound echoing in a loop that made their skin crawl. The air turned thick, filled with darkness that threatened to consume their souls whole. It was a realization that they were a part of something much bigger than themselves, a dance with dark forces they did not understand, desires they could not comprehend. With their hearts pounding like thunder, Tommy grabbed Sarah and Jake by their hands, tightening his grip, determined not to let them go. The laughter grew louder, and the darkness loomed closer, as if sensing their fear, feeding on it. "We can't give in," he shouted, his voice rising above the sinister chorus, a spark of bravery igniting within him. Together, they turned their backs to the dark chasm, trying to tune out the horrifying shapes looming behind them. "Follow me," he urged, plunging forward into the unknown, trusting that there had to be a way out of this labyrinth of despair. Each frantic step felt heavy, as if the ground itself were trying to shackle them to the past, to the horrors that this place had witnessed. But Tommy could feel something change in the atmosphere, like the air itself responding to their defiance, vibrating with an unspent energy. Suddenly, as they rounded a corner, they stumbled upon a vast room. It was starkly different from the rest of the house, filled with a brightness that nearly blinded them. In the center stood a large mirror, its surface smooth and reflecting opalescent colors. The air felt lighter, promising. Tommy's heart raced as they approached the mirror, hope creeping back into his chest as the light washed over them. As they stood before the mirror, their reflections wavered. They saw themselves not as they were but as they longed to be, brave, strong, and bathed in the warmth of daylight. The children stared in awe, feeling a sense of relief wash over them. But as they reached out toward the shimmering surface, their reflections faltered, revealing flickers of the spirits that once prowled the hallways of the forsaken house. Faces, once innocent and joyful, were now twisted in despair. The children gasped, stumbling backward as the laughter behind them grew louder, filling the room with its horror. "This can't be the way out," Jake exclaimed, backing away from the mirror, his gut churning with fear. "It's a trick." "No," Tommy shouted, a new determination flooding his voice. "It's a way to remember. We have to face them. We have to remember who we are, and why we have to leave." The dark laughter swirled around them, a cacophony urging them closer to despair. And yet, as Tommy turned to face the mirror again, he spoke firmly, "You're not alone anymore." His voice resonated, appealing to the trapped spirits, hoping they could hear him, hoping they could feel the beat of life pulsing through him. In that moment, the children found their voices. They joined Tommy, standing together, united. "We remember you," Sarah shouted, tears glistening in her eyes. "You can be free." Jake extended a tentative hand toward the mirror, feeling the warmth of hope blooming in his heart. The laughter began to change, morphing from malicious to mournful, the shadows quivering as if caught in the pull of an awakening light. One by one, the children began to see flashes of joy, sunny days, laughter, friends, and family. Reminders of who they were before the darkness engulfed them. The faces in the mirror began to shift, mingling with their own, forming new tales that outshone the horrors of the past. As the last beam of darkness flickered, the world around them trembled. With a final push of courage, they stepped toward the mirror, feeling the warmth pressing against their skin, the weight of despair lifting from their hearts. And that moment was the key. Their shared memories acted as a bridge, connecting the sorrowful spirits to the light, turning their cries into song. It was then that the darkness cracked and broke into millions of shards, each fragment pulling apart the fetters that bound both the children and the trapped spirits alike. Laughter rang sacredly around them, childhood laughter that resounded for healing, its echo clinging to their spirits like a warm embrace. The forsaken house shuddered as the shadows retreated, spiraling back into the depths from which they came. The children felt the weight lift off their shoulders, no longer trapped in that sinister abode. The last thing they heard before bursting forth into freedom was the harmonious sigh of liberation, as the once lost spirits found their way home at last. Together, they ran, feeling the exhilaration of life returning to their limbs, racing toward a future free from the past. The haunting tales written on the walls of the forsaken house became but a distant memory, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, hope could shine brightly if you dared to stand together and remember who you truly were. In the deep darkness that wrapped around Tommy and his friends, his mind raced like a wild stallion, searching for any clue or hint that might lead them to safety. Yet, with each fleeting thought, despair wrapped around him like a heavy blanket, making it hard to breathe. The dark spirits, with their shimmering, ghostly forms, seemed to close in tighter on them. Their hollow laughter echoed off the walls of the forsaken house, rising like a terrifying song that filled every corner of the once quiet rooms. It was as if hope had vanished, just like morning mist disappearing under the bright, unforgiving sun. All that remained were shadows swirling around them, and the petrifying laughter lingered in the air like a thick fog. "Stick together, we can fight this," Tommy called out, though deep down, he felt that his words were just sounds drifting into the void. The darkness pulsed around them, as if it had a life of its own, breathing in rhythm with the demonic laughter that skittered around them like a cruel wind. Fear hung heavily in the air, a tangible weight that seemed to sit on their hearts, strangling any hint of hope that tried to surface. Jake looked at Tommy, his eyes flashing with a desperate kind of determination. "We can't stay here, let's find a way out," he shouted, his voice filled with urgency, as he pointed toward a doorway that seemed to shimmer with possibility. But as they raced forward, propelled by their fear and adrenaline, the world around them twisted and warped. Hallways stretched endlessly, bending in peculiar ways, walls seemingly melting together. Rooms distorted before their eyes, each revealing more nightmarish visions than the last. The spirits rushed toward them, their forms blending seamlessly with the darkness like ink in water. Their laughter crashed over the children like waves on a lonely shore, each wave bringing with it the echoes of a lost childhood, taunting them with their misfortune. What once resembled joy turned into a chilling reminder of the bond they shared, now twisted and corrupted. With every step they took, It felt as if the line between joy and horror was becoming thinner, drawing them closer to a terrifying fate. Suddenly, in the midst of their panic, Sarah stumbled. Her foot caught on a jagged edge of the warped wooden floor, and she fell forward, her hands reaching out for balance. A sharp gasp escaped her lips, only to be swallowed by a chorus of haunting giggles that erupted from the spirits, teasing her fall. Tommy's instincts kicked in, and he reached out desperately, but time seemed to slow, as if the universe itself was casting a spell to elongate this horror. Sarah felt the pull of the shadows wrapping around her like icy fingers, dragging her into the sinister depths. "Tommy!" Sarah's voice cried out in desperation, her panic filling the thick silence around them. But with each plea, the spirits surged forth, growing stronger, eager to feed off her fear and despair. Her form began to blur into the darkness, engulfed by it as if she were simply a flickering candle extinguished by a cruel gust of wind. Tommy and Jake both lunged for her, their hearts pounding hard against their chests, as if trying to escape from the dark fates looming over them. They grasped Sarah's hands tightly, holding on with all their might, squeezing her palms and fighting against the shadow that threatened to consume her. But the oppressive despair that clung to the air was more than just a feeling, it seeped into their bones, making them feel more fragile than they ever had before. The shadows howled, their laughter cascading around them, layered voices merging into a cacophony of taunts that pierced their heartstrings, shredding their resolve into pieces. Just when hope shimmered on the horizon, Jake's grip faltered. An expression of grim acceptance washed over his face. "We can't save her. Go, just go," he yelled, the anguish clear in his voice. His words, sharp as a knife, stabbed at Tommy, sending cold shivers down his spine. "No, Jake, I won't leave her," Tommy shouted, feeling the weight of their situation crash down on him. He turned to Sarah, tears pricking at his eyes, feeling the oppressive force pulling her away even stronger now. "Stay with us, just hold on," he called out, desperation dancing on the edge of his voice. But the shadows laughed, and their force was unbearable. In a horrific moment, the darkness surged forward, swallowing Sarah whole. Her terrified shriek was the last sound Tommy heard, a heartbreaking cry that echoed cruelly before fading completely, like a silent scream trapped in a glass jar. The laughter of the spirits rippled through the air, each echo burying the remnants of childhood innocence and leaving only an abyss behind. Overcome with despair, Tommy and Jake pressed deeper into the forsaken halls, feeling the weight of the loss pulling them down. They felt as if the very foundation of the forsaken house was against them, determined to keep them trapped like souls added to its collection of sorrow. With every step, fear clawed at their hearts until it felt as if they would burst. Tommy stumbled across a warped mirror hanging crookedly on the wall, its surface coated in filth. When he peered into it, he gasped at the sight. His own reflection stared back at him, but behind him, the mirror filled with twisted, grotesque faces, children like him, forever lost in the grip of this terrible place. They stared back with wide, hollow eyes, their mouths curled into perpetual looks of horror. In that moment, a crushing wave of guilt and anguish washed over him like icy water. The faces were of those who had come before him, trapped within the forsaken house as if it were a cage designed to keep their joy alive in sinister fashion. The weight of his surroundings pressed harder now, shadows rushing forward with renewed vigor, and their laughter morphed into a terrifying melody of chaos, mingling with agonized whispers of those lost within it. Tommy could feel the walls closing in, tightening around him like a snake wrapping its body deftly around its prey. Each of the spirits seemed to shift closer, eyes glowing with hungry interest. "Tommy, we need to move," Jake exclaimed, grabbing Tommy's shoulder and shaking him from his stupor. "We have to find a way out." But as they looked around, the shadows danced with malevolent glee, as if they delighted in their torment. Each shadow seemed to hiss in delight, whispering sweet promises to Tommy of a warm embrace, of belonging, a twisted comfort in a place designed to breed terror. "We can't let them take us," Tommy yelled, trying to build strength within his voice, even as faint whispers echoed in his mind, coaxing him to surrender to the darkness. The spirit's presence surrounded them, wrapping around their legs and tugging at their clothes, heavy as lead. As the darkness pulsed and throbbed, the air thickened, making it harder to breathe. Tommy felt his resolve weaken, as if the shadows had grown powerful enough to seep into his thoughts. He remembered the laughter of his friends, the warm sun on his face, and the feeling of safety when everyone was together. But those thoughts slipped away, threatening to drown in the overwhelming blackness. It was then that he realized the terrible truth. If they were consumed by the darkness, they would join the spirits in their never-ending game, and the echo of their laughter would never cease. They would lose themselves, becoming mere whispers in the wind, their cries blending with those of the children trapped within. The shadows throbbed with a life of their own, eager to capture the last flickers of hope within him. Tommy felt himself being absorbed into the darkness, his fears swelling within him until they became a part of the cold shadows, and his heart raced in terror. In that very moment, tangled in despair, he squeezed Jake's shoulder, desperation burning bright in his eyes. "We have to fight. We can't give in." Jake nodded, determination flooding his face despite the fear glistening in his eyes. They pushed forward, running as fast as they could, ignoring the way the walls seemed to close in around them, desperate to trap them for eternity. The shadows roared with laughter behind them, taunting their every move, pulling at their limbs as if trying to anchor them in place. But deep within the darkness, something flickered, a tiny flame of hope ignited by their friendship. Together, Tommy shouted, and Jake joined in, their voices merging as they pushed each other forward. They focused on the bond between them, their shared memories, the laughter they created, and the adventures that made them best friends. Just as darkness threatened to swallow them whole, the thoughts of friendship wrapped around them, pushing back against the clutches of despair. At that moment, the forsaken house seemed to shake, the walls trembling as if it knew it couldn't hold them against the power of their bond. Tommy and Jake ran towards the flicker of light ahead, the whispers of the spirits fading behind them, replaced by the strength they shared. The darkness had not defeated them, instead, it had reminded them of their love for one another. With one final push, they broke through the dark barrier, feeling the warmth of hope wash over them like a soft blanket. They didn't know what lay beyond, but they chose to step forward, hand in hand, hearts intertwined. The shadows howled in rage, but their laughter became mere echoes as Tommy and Jake raced away, determined to not become part of the haunting legacy of the Forsaken House. And thus, the Forsaken House continued to stand, a dark monument amidst Eldridge Hollow, forever gathering the unwitting while the triumphant laughter of Tommy and Jake echoed in the distance, a sound of defiance against the endless night. They had escaped, not just from the darkness but into a world where bonds of friendship could light the darkest paths. Though shadows lingered, hope remained, stronger than any fear. Forever intertwined in each other's hearts, they carried that flicker of light wherever they would go.